I don't know where you're hearing this, but if you've ever spent an afternoon sitting beside an elderly loved one, you'll understand what I'm about to share. That day, in a small clinic at the end of the hallway, I was speaking with a 74-year-old patient. He came with his granddaughter. She was about 7 years old, hair tied up high, holding a storybook. She sat beside him, opened the book, and asked, "Grandpa, who am I?" He looked at her for a moment, then smiled. A very strange smile, his eyes drifting away. And he replied in a voice as soft as the wind, "You are who again?" The little girl frowned, tilted her head, and asked again in her small voice, "You don't remember my name?" And at that moment, he began to cry. Not loudly. Not a scream. Just slow, quiet tears falling, one drop at a time. I stood beside them, heart sinking. No one in the room said another word. That moment wasn't about forgetting her name. It was about him realizing. He was forgetting. And he was scared. A fear that words could not express. You see, many people think forgetfulness is just part of aging. But as a brain specialist, let me tell you this. Memories don't disappear on their own. They're taken bit by silent injuries. And in most of the stroke cases I've treated, the first thing patients lose is not their smile, or their voice, but 3 simple words. 3 words that seem meaningless. But they are the brain's first alarm bell, before memories begin to slip away from their lives. Let me tell you about Mr. David. He was 74 years old, a retired carpenter from northern Ohio. His whole life revolved around wood, measuring tape, and numbers. People in town used to joke, Mr. David could build memories right into the cabinets he made. That day, he came to the clinic with his daughter. His voice was still deep and clear, his eyes still sharp like someone time hadn't slowed down. He told me stories from his life, every house he built, every small bridge he assembled for the neighborhood. I nodded along, thinking to myself, with a memory like this, it's probably nothing serious. But as a habit of the profession, I still gave him the 3-word test. I looked at him gently and said, "Mr. David, I'm going to say 3 words now, clock orange car. Could you repeat them for me?" He smiled and answered instantly without hesitation, "Clock orange car. Too easy." I smiled back and shifted to casual conversation, asking about his grandchildren, his hometown. A few minutes passed. Then I asked again, "Do you remember the 3 words I said earlier?" His face paused for a moment. His eyes started to lose focus. "Orange. That's one. And what was the rest?" He looked down at his hands. Silence filled the small room. Then he looked up and gave a faint smile, a smile full of effort. Maybe I'm getting a little fuzzy. His daughter sitting next to him gently bowed her head. I saw her shoulders trembling. None of us said another word. 2 days later, Mr. David suffered a minor stroke. He could still walk, still talk. But the first thing that disappeared was the name of the granddaughter he used to tell stories to every night. A few weeks later, he began getting lost while walking around the neighborhood, a place he had lived in for over 30 years. His memory didn't vanish all at once, but slowly faded. And faded. As if someone were using an eraser, lightly brushing over each memory. I opened his file again and looked at the line I had written that day, unable to recall 3 words after 3 minutes, clock orange car. Just 3 words. 3 tiny words. And then, a part of his life slowly slipped out of memory like a piece of wood falling from the hand of a craftsman who no longer remembers how to hold a nail. I know. When our loved ones start forgetting things, we often comfort each other by saying, "It's okay, all older people forget stuff." And then we laugh it off, we assume it's just age catching up. But beneath the scalp, and the stillness of the skull, the brain may already be silently struggling. There's a tiny region deep within the brain, scientifically known as the hippocampus. You can think of it like a temporary shelf, where short-term memories are placed each day. Everything we just heard, just saw, or just said passes through that temporary shelf before being stored in long-term memory. But as we age, or when blood flow to the brain becomes less consistent, that little shelf starts to tilt. And everything placed on it begins to slip away. Often, the older memories, stories from 10 or 20 years ago, remain clear. But what happened this morning, or even 5 minutes ago, starts to vanish without a trace. Many people will repeat a question, or forget the name of a familiar object, or stop speaking mid-sentence, eyes drifting away, then sigh and say, "Never mind. I forgot." In medicine, there's a term, minor stroke. It doesn't knock someone down. It doesn't distort the face. It doesn't require an emergency call right away. But it causes tiny injuries, in the brain's tiniest blood vessels, disrupting the short-term memory function that we often ignore because it feels too mild. And then one day, you realize the person you love starts forgetting their daughter's name, the road to church, a familiar voice. There's no alarm bell. Just small silences, repeating daily like missing puzzle pieces. I've seen many patients come in when it's already too late. When they no longer recognize anyone, when each morning feels like a blank page. And I often wonder, if only their loved ones had been checked earlier, if those 3 words had been tested weekly, could their memories have lasted a little longer? We can't stop the brain from aging. But we can hear its call much sooner. Not through machines, but through attention, care, and daily connection. There was a time when I believed people only came to see a doctor when something was wrong. But reality showed me the opposite. Many come not because of pain, but because of a quiet instinct deep inside that someone they love is slowly becoming someone else. No one can quite explain what's different. It's just simple words no longer come easily. A conversation just had gets repeated a few minutes later. Sometimes their eyes seem to drift away, then return with a faint, uncertain smile. And then, the son or daughter sitting in front of me often asks, "Doctor, is there any way to know sooner? Is there anything to help us avoid waiting until it's too late?" The answer is, yes. It's not complicated. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't even require a clinic. It only asks for one thing, sincere attention. I call it the 3-word test. You can do this anywhere on a quiet sunny morning, while sharing tea with your parents, or after dinner when everyone's relaxed. Choose a gentle moment. Look into your loved one's eyes, and say, "Grandpa, I'm going to say 3 words, orange clock car. Can you repeat them for me?" Most people will repeat them right away. Then you just keep chatting normally. Ask a few light-hearted things, bring up an old memory, or simply say, "What was your favorite snack when you were little?" Exactly 3 minutes later, smile and ask again, "Do you remember the 3 words I said earlier?" With that one gentle question, you'll see something that many people miss. If they remember all 3, memory is still strong. If they remember 2, keep a closer eye. If they remember only 1 or none, don't panic, but please take them for a checkup. This is not a test to find fault. It's a way to reach out and gently hold on to something that may be slipping away. I still remember one time, an 80-year-old mother sat in front of me, looking lovingly at her daughter, then smiling shyly when asked to recall the 3 words. She couldn't remember clearly. She said just one word, "car." Her daughter didn't say anything. She just held her mother's hand for a long time, as if pouring all her love into that touch, trying to hold on to one tiny piece of memory. We cannot hold on to everything. We cannot stop time from doing its work. But we can preserve a part of someone's memory, if we care enough to ask at the right time. Those three little words, so small, yet they may be the final bridge between the present and someone slowly drifting away. After many years as a neurologist, what troubles me the most isn't the severe strokes, it's the appointments that come too late. When, in truth, just one early warning could have changed everything. And what delays people isn't a lack of love or concern. It's that they believe in things that seem harmless. The sentence I hear most often is, "It's normal to forget when you're old, doctor." Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Sounds comforting, even kind. But that one sentence, repeated in millions of homes, has quietly buried the brain's earliest cries for help. You see, it's true that aging brings some forgetfulness. But when your loved one starts forgetting simple words, repeating questions within minutes, or calling familiar objects by the wrong name, that's no longer just getting old. That's the brain falling out of rhythm. And when that rhythm breaks without being noticed, it turns into damage that may never be reversed. From forgetting one word, to forgetting the name of a loved one, to forgetting who they themselves are. Another common belief I often hear is, "My dad's still strong, just a little forgetful, not a big deal." But here's the problem, a mild stroke doesn't hurt. It doesn't show up loudly like people expect. No collapsing. No convulsions. No rambling speech. It arrives like a quiet stranger. Slips in and takes a piece of memory, then leaves without leaving a clear trace. And if it returns, it might not just take more memory, it might take the ability to speak, to walk, or take your loved one away for good. I'm not telling you this to scare you, but to show you, indifference often wears the mask of gentleness. We say it's probably nothing, because we don't want to worry them. We delay the doctor's visit, because we don't want to make a fuss. But when it's too late, we wish we had made a fuss just a little earlier. I'm not saying forgetting a word means a stroke is coming. And I'm not saying older adults must remember everything. I'm just asking you not to ignore patterns that repeat. And don't assume memory will always return on its own. Because once memory starts to fall away, it doesn't come back. It just drifts farther, and we're left standing by, if we don't reach for it in time. Now, I'll tell you about families who chose a different path. They didn't wait. They didn't brush it off. They chose to hold on to memory with small, consistent, loving actions. I once asked a patient, "What scares you the most about growing old?" He looked out the window and said, "Not death, doctor, but forgetting who I am, and who once loved me." We often think memory belongs to the brain. But some memories, if no one helps hold on to them, they disappear. Not because of illness, but because no one touches them anymore. I once met a young woman who called her mother on video every day. Not to talk about anything important. Just to repeat 3 words, flower, cat, wind. Each day, 3 different words. And after 3 minutes, she would ask again, "Do you remember them?" Some days her mother did. Some days she didn't. But the daughter kept doing it, every single day. I asked why she was so patient. She smiled and said, "Because I don't want my mother to just be alive, but to still remember who she once was." I call people like her memory keepers. No degrees required. No training. Just a heart soft enough to stay gentle, and strong enough not to cry when a loved one forgets them. You can be one too. It doesn't take much time. Just once a week, sit down with your parents, read 3 simple words, tree, shirt, lamp. Then a few minutes later, ask again. Write it down in a notebook. The date. The result. Their expression. If you have young children, include them. Kids are great at creating new memories. Let them be the bridge between generations. Make the memory check a light game fun, simple, without pressure. Not to track illness, but to build connection. There's a family in San Jose that does this every Sunday morning. They call it 3 words for Grandma. Everyone gathers and reads 3 random words with her. Then they eat breakfast and chat. At the end of the meal, they ask again to see if she remembers. When she recalls all 3, the whole family cheers like children. When she forgets, no one is sad, they just hug her a little longer. Because they understand. Preserving memory isn't about forcing the brain, it's about keeping the feeling of being loved and alive. I've seen families fall apart as loved ones fade. But I've also seen families become closer than ever. Just because they chose to hold on to every little memory through small, patient, consistent acts. You can't stop time. But you can choose to be the one who stays beside a loved one's memory. Choose to be the child, the grandchild, the friend, who quietly holds on to the things the brain is starting to let go. You might not stop a stroke. But you can make sure that the last memory they hold is you. I still remember. One late winter afternoon, in a small rehab room on the 3rd floor, an elderly man in his 80s was learning how to speak again. He had once been a teacher. A life built on words. And now, he was learning how to pronounce each syllable from scratch. Beside him sat his wife. A petite woman, her hand resting gently on his like a thread tying the past to the present. That day, after nearly 30 minutes of practice, he managed to say one sentence. Just 3 words. Your name. Dear. His voice was unclear. The words weren't perfect. But she understood. She burst into tears. The entire room fell silent. Not because he had remembered. But because the first thing he chose to remember was the name of the one he loves. That was the moment I understood. The brain may forget but the heart remembers, if someone is there to help hold on. 3 words. A hand held. A look that never lets go. These small things can bring memories a little closer. Hold on to them for one more day, one more week, just enough to make someone feel they haven't been forgotten in this life. If you're still watching now, maybe you're thinking of someone too. Someone who once taught you to say the name of life. Someone who once held you in the arms of memory. And now, maybe you're the only one close enough to make sure their name doesn't disappear into the long silence. I don't have a miracle. I'm just a doctor, but I believe every child can be an anchor to someone's memory. No reason needed. No promise required. Just stay. Stay. Beside someone who's slowly forgetting. And whisper their name like they once whispered yours when you were small. Start with 3 words. Gently. Sincerely. Regularly. You won't just preserve a memory. You'll preserve a person. If this video made you think of someone you once loved, once cared for, someone who might now be forgetting the smallest things, please leave a comment below, even just a quiet dot. So I know you're still here, still walking beside the fading memories around us. And if you found this message meaningful, click like to hold on to something good. And share this video with a loved one, a friend, because who knows, maybe one small share today could help one memory last just a little longer.